All right, today we're talking about a leader whose quiet determination completely reshaped a nation. I'm talking about Ghana's John Kuffuor, a man they called the Gentle Giant.
And this quote, it just sets the stage perfectly. You have to remember, at the time, a lot of the stories about Africa were, focused on conflict and instability. But then you had world leaders looking at Kuffuor and seeing something totally different, a new path forward, one built on dignity, democracy, and a real vision for the future.
So that leads us right to the big question, right? How did one leader take a country in a deep, deep economic crisis and turn it into a model for stability in Africa? The Ghana he inherited was really struggling. So how did he do it? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down.
Okay, here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with a huge moment for Ghana's democracy. Then we'll get to know the man himself. From there, we'll dive into the economic turnaround he engineered, look at how he made Ghana a major player on the world stage, and wrap it all up with what we can call the Kuffuor Doctrine.
All right, first up, a legacy of firsts. You see, to really get a handle on Kuffuor's impact, you've got to understand just how big of a deal it was when he first came into power. I mean, this was so much more than just another election. Think about it. For a young democracy, the real test, the ultimate stress test, is whether power can change hands peacefully from one party to a rival party. When Ghana did that, it was a massive signal. It proved their democratic institutions were strong enough to last, and that sent a powerful message, not just for Ghana, but for the whole region. So, who was this guy at the center of it all? Let's find out. On to our second section, the Gentle Giant's Rise. Kuffuor's path to the presidency was anything but short. He was educated at Oxford, became a lawyer, and jumped into politics all the way back in 1969. He literally spent decades in public service. So this wasn't some kind of overnight sensation. No way. This was the result of a whole lifetime getting ready for that top job.
And man, all that preparation was absolutely crucial, because the challenge he walked into on day one, it was huge. Which brings us to Section 3, Ghana's economic turnaround.
Just look at this comparison. The difference between Ghana in 2000 when he started and 2008 when he left is just, wow, it's night and day. He inherited a country being crushed by debt, with inflation totally out of control, but he left behind a nation with major debt relief and an economy that was stable and actually growing. I mean, the turnaround was incredible.
So, the big question is, how on earth did he pull it off? Well, it came down to a bunch of really bold, smart policies. First, he made the tough call to join the highly indebted Poor Countries Initiative. Now, that was a little tough on national pride for sure, but it was absolutely necessary for debt relief. But it wasn't just about the big economic picture. He focused on the people, launching a national health insurance plan, a school feeding program, and even direct cash support for the poorest families. And on top of all that, he did something huge for democracy. He got rid of the criminal libel law, which basically set the press free.
And you can see the real-world results right here. Just look at inflation. When Kuffuor took office, it was over 40%. That makes everything impossibly expensive for regular people. By the time he left, he had slashed it by more than half, down to around 18%. Now that is a change you can feel in your wallet every single day.
But Kuffuor wasn't just thinking about Ghana. His vision was much, much bigger. And what's really interesting is how his success at home gave him a ton of influence on the international stage. So let's look at how he became such an important voice for Africa.
Because he was doing such a great job at home, leaders around the world really started to respect him. It didn't take long for him to become a major player in regional politics, first as chairman of ECOWAS, and then later leading the entire African Union. And whenever there was a crisis, like the terrible post-election violence in Kenya, guess who they called to help find a solution? John Kuffuor. And what's so important to understand is that everything he did, both at home and abroad, was driven by this core idea he called good governance. It's pretty simple, really. It's the belief that you can't have real peace and prosperity without a solid foundation of democracy, the rule of law, protecting human rights, and smart economic management. That was his playbook for everything.
Okay, so this brings us to our final section. Let's pull all of these different pieces together and see if we can define what you might call the Kuffuor Doctrine. When you really boil it down, his entire philosophy rested on these four key pillars. First, economic pragmatism. He wasn't stuck on one ideology. He did what worked, mixing free market ideas with social programs. Second, democratic consolidation. He was all about protecting things like a free press and making sure power changed hands peacefully. Third, active diplomacy. He really elevated Ghana's role in the world. And finally, and maybe most importantly, human-centered development. He understood that an economy is nothing if its people aren't healthy and educated.
So in the end, his 8 years as president were about so much more than just balancing budgets or building infrastructure. His leadership truly reshaped Ghana's entire identity on the world stage. It became a shining example of what a modern African nation could achieve.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. In a world that's facing so many complicated problems today, what can our leaders learn from the quiet, steady, and determined legacy of the gentle giant?